So what's happened to the labor market? Last Friday, we got the employment report for May. That surprised a lot of people because it showed that even though we've been seeing millions of new unemployment claim filings every week, as reported by the Department of Labor, it still showed an increase in jobs of 2.5 million in May versus April. This is still down almost 20 million jobs versus the peak in February, so it's not like this is great news on the economy. It's a slight improvement. And when we sort through all the numbers, it is, in fact, a slight improvement. Whether it will continue may depend a lot on what happens with the support of the labor market and the employers and all as we go through the summer and certain parts of the support that's in the CARES Act get phased out. So what we see since September 2010, we were up 22 million jobs through February. We've lost a few in March, a few being the biggest drop since the Great Depression. And the drop in April was huge, huge, huge. So we see this little bit of a recovery in May. And like I say, plus 2.5 is a nice number, but we're still way, 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 way down versus where we were in February. Where are we recovering? Well, the big recovery is leisure and hospitality. And so part of why the economists and those of us who were anticipating the May number to go down again, because we had the weekly information on new unemployment benefits filings. We don't have weekly information on jobs added. So we kind of missed the fact that different economies were opening up. The Wisconsin Supreme Court said all of your restrictions are lifted so you can open up your bars and your restaurants and everything. But there was no reporting on that until we got to this jobs report, the employment report, on the first Friday in June. So we see leisure and hospitality, those bars and restaurants, et cetera, are the big net plus. But if we look at the 3-month change, even including that 1.25 million plus in May, we see that leisure and hospitality are still down 7 million jobs versus February. So they were down 8.25. They're now only down 7 million. So that's what we're seeing. Different parts of the economy are reopening in different states. Some states are seeing some spikes in COVID-19 infections. Others are not. And we'll see how this goes throughout the summer as states reopen, whether they're going to have to close. I think I saw a report today that Florida is going to close down the bars again because they're starting to see the spike and don't think it's a good idea. Here we see the unemployment rates for the last 12, 13 years. We see that they went up in the Great Recession back in 2000. They went down throughout the Obama administration. They went down through February, and then they spiked with the March, April, May reports. Officially, they reported that the unemployment rate in May was 13.3%. So that's not bad versus what it was in April, which was higher. And the U6 unemployment rate, which is a slightly broader measure of unemployment, was 21.2% in May. Again, down from 22.8% in April. The U3 includes people that say they were not working, looking for a job in the last 4 weeks. The U6 includes people that were looking for a job in the last year, and also people who were working part-time who wanted full-time employment, like if their employer cut their hours. So we see a big, the difference between the U3 and the U6 rate had shrunk. Now it's back up to a big difference again. So how does the BLS classify people? Well, this is a typical report where you have that total non-institutional population. You've got people who are working and people who are not working. And the people who are not working during that week of the survey, but were absent because of vacation or illness or some reason like that are considered employed for purposes of the household. So people who are on layoff awaiting recall or otherwise not working and actively looking for work because they just came back to the workforce or they just graduated school and they're looking for a job, those people are considered unemployed. And then you've got the people who are not working and not looking for work who are considered not in the labor force. So we see that the total non-institute population of 16 and over was 260 million in May, of which about 158 million are the civilian labor force. So a little over 100 million are people who are over 16 and not in the labor force because they're still high school students, because they're non-working spouses, because they're retired, because of whatever reason. And we see that the total unemployed as reported in May was a few lines down, 20,985,000, and the 20,985,000 divided by the 158 gets you to 13.3%. As we go through this, if you have questions, if I'm going too fast through something, feel free to speak up. And as we get through the end of the section, I will try to do a better job of asking overall questions about that section. So how have the major categories the way the BLS classifies people? We've got jobs lost, people who are furloughed but expected to come back, and other people who are unemployed, those job leavers, re-entrants, new entrants. The furloughed was a very small number in February, a little bigger in March, and huge in April and May, where the jobs lost got a little bigger from February to March, a little bigger again in April, a little bigger in May, and the other is actually gone down a little bit since February. New entrants and folks like that apparently are less excited about trying to come into this job market than they were in February. The BLS admits to a classification error of how they classify people as employed versus unemployed when they got to that 13.3% unemployment rate. They say that there's people who were not working, who actually were on company payrolls, essentially the same kind of thing as people who were on vacation, but these weren't people who were on vacation or out ill. They were out for other reasons. Their company just didn't have the business and was not, so they weren't being called into work. And the BLS indicates that that's about 4.9 million people, I think, is the number. But it would raise the unemployment rate if they had included those and classified them as unemployed as opposed to employed. It would raise the unemployment rate from the 13.3% up to 16.4%. That's what all this fine print says. And how they get there is they look at the people who are employed with a job but not at work in May of the last 5 years. So the total not at work has gone from about 4 million every May in the prior 4 years to over 8 million this May. You've got the people that are on vacation, out for illness, child care, et cetera, et cetera. And all the way on the far right, we see a big number of 5,448,000 people, where the average for the prior 4 years was 549,000. So that's how they get to their 4.9. They take the 5,448,000, subtract the 549, and it's about 4.9 million, which is their admitted adjustment, probably corrected, but because for consistency, they haven't made that adjustment in the quote official number, but they're telling us about it as to how we should understand the numbers. And this is from Steve Ratner, Alternative Ways of Measuring. You've got the reported number of 13.3. You've got their 3% classification adjustment. You've got the working part-time for economic reasons. which goes included in the U6 rate, and one a job not looking. And that's how you get to the 27.7. And I don't know exactly how their whole math works, but that's one way of looking at it. When I look at this, I see that I break it out, the unemployed, into a couple of categories. Typically, you have the insured unemployed who are receiving unemployment benefits, which in total unemployed in February per the BLS was 5.8 million. The insured unemployed in February was 1.7 million, which means there were 4.1 million other unemployed who were not receiving benefits. And again, that's benefits ran out, an insufficient work history to qualify, new high school and college grads looking for a job, other people coming back to the workforce. So about 4.1 million other unemployed in February. And these are some of the numbers that go into that other unemployed. The top one is we have the long-term unemployed whose benefits would have run out for 27 weeks or more, which in February was about 1.1 million, and in May was a little over 1.1 million. We would round to 1.2 million. You have the re-entrance to the labor force, which in February was 1.8 million. In May was 1.645 million. And you have the new entrance to the labor force, which actually has gone up a little, 500,000 in February, 500,000 in May. If you add those three categories together, they make up 3.4 million. In February, they make up 3.4 million of that total difference of 4.1 million. In May, that's 3.3 million out of a 0.2 million difference. Because when you go to the May numbers, you see that the BLS reported there were only 21 million people unemployed in May. But the separate Department of Labor reported that in that week, there were 20.8 million receiving unemployment benefits. So the difference between those two numbers is only 200,000 people, even though we know from that prior slide that there's 3.3 million additional people, who have to be unemployed and are not receiving benefits. So this is another error. It's not the one the BLS has identified. It's another error in the numbers they reported in May. I assume for the sake of my calculations that it's the same number of other people not receiving benefits in May of 4.1 million as we saw back in February. So the total unemployed is probably 29.8 million. And if we take that 29.8 million, divide it by the labor force of 158 million, and I'm pulling out my calculator here, and I don't know if you guys can see this, but if we get a unemployment rate of 18.9%, is probably what the unemployment rate was in May. Again, that is down from the adjusted rate in April, so it's a move in the right direction, but it's a huge, huge number, and numbers that we have not seen since the Great Depression. The top unemployment rate in the Great Recession was 10%. I believe the top unemployment rate since the Great Depression was about 10.8% back in the 82-83 recession. So this is a big, big increase in the unemployment rate. Still not a good number, but it was a number in the right direction. Now, my speculation as to the BLS's 4.9 million number is that these people who were employed and on company payrolls but not working, the excess number, are people who are being paid through the PPP and other government loan programs. Because as we talked about in the CARES Act, we're supporting people who would otherwise get laid off two ways. One, traditional way, we give them unemployment benefits, and in fact, enhanced unemployment benefits. The other way we're doing it is we're providing money to companies so they can keep people on the company payrolls even when they're not working. And that appears to be what that 4.9 million number is. So all these people are on company payrolls, so they are included in the jobs number that was reported of the plus 2 point, if we go back a few slides and said that we had 152.5 million people, or 130.4 million jobs in April and 132.9 in May. Of that 132.9, 4.9 million of them are private sector jobs not being supported by the private sector, they're being supported by government assistance. So the jobs numbers are somewhat misleading. Technically, they're correct. These are people on payrolls. This is the payroll number of payroll jobs, but it's somewhat misleading in terms of thinking of these as private sector payroll jobs. And what I don't know is going to happen is if we don't get any more assistance passed, as the Republicans are arguing, what happens as the different portions of the CARES Act phase out. I know that the additional unemployment assistance phases out the end of July. Does anyone know when on the PPP loans, how long the employers need to keep those employees on payroll? I think it might just be to the end of June. So we may see a reduction of those 4.9 million people in July, even as the economy starts to further open up and we have a real recovery, we'll see an artificial downturn of potentially those 4.9 million people. Have I confused everyone yet? This is how many months it has taken to get back to a total jobs recovery for recession since 1948, which is when the BLS started recording a lot of statistics. Obviously, the longest one was the 2007 Great Recession. The longest one before that was actually the 2001 recession, which was considered, from a GDP standpoint, an incredibly mild recession. As jobs loss percent, it still wasn't the biggest, although with over 3 million jobs lost at its peak, in sheer absolute numbers, it was the biggest until the Great Recession. But it took a long time, 4 years, for total jobs recovery then, where the Great Recession took over 6 years. Other recessions tended to recover a lot faster. The 80 and 81, 82 recessions are considered separate here. To a certain extent, they were related. And it might be a slightly longer recovery, but they still were much shorter than the early 2000s and the Great Recession. And obviously, the question with the big over here on we're just here on the current recession, the COVID-19 recession, and how long this one will take, no one knows. Job creation by president was one of David's ones that he had, which showed that President Trump's record was okay, mediocre, not great, until recently when it has obviously become the worst since Herbert Hoover. Unemployment benefits by state. Some states pay more, some states pay less. Massachusetts pays the most at the top of the graph. Louisiana pays the least. The blue is the state unemployment benefits. The gray is the extra $600 a week supplement in the CARES Act for July 31st. Most people collecting unemployment right now, somewhere around 2/3, I think, are actually taking home more now than they were when they were working. Your lower income people are doing better. Your people who got laid off from $150,000 jobs are not.